I talk about cardiac pacing. And in the very early stages of cardiac pacing, the cardiac pacemaker did not know what the heart rate was doing. So, or even the heart rhythm, or even any of the more sophisticated measures it now senses. And so they basically had these wires poked through the sternum, and they just stimulated the heart in order to improve, kind of morbid bradycardia. But it ended up causing a lot of arrhythmias because it wasn't synchronized to the way the heart likes to, pump. And so, so for the last 30, 40 years, we've been doing brain pacing, being blind and deaf to what goes on in the brain, what is being modulated. So the overall difference in adaptive DBS is it's the first type of brain pacing, which is listening to the heart rhythm, to the brain rhythm, and modulating that specific rhythm. So the initial rhythm that the sensing DBS or adaptive DBS is responding to is the beta band, is the beta rhythm, which has the most evidence of being related to Parkinsonian motor symptoms. Most of the evidence relies on the change in the beta power is related to the change in the motor function. So there isn't really a one-to-one relationship with exact beta, microsecond to microsecond levels and your movement, which I think is a bit of a generalization that gets out in the literature, but it's clearly a functional rhythm that is related to motor function. And by modulating it, we modulate behavior. So instead of just knowing that the open loop, the way we've been doing DBS, we know it does modulate the beta band power. That's the research that I and many other people have done. But we've never used that to then drive the stimulator. Now, the other thing that's really important is dopaminergic medication also modulates the beta rhythm in the same direction. So they both drive it down. And the analogy I use there for people is if you or your loved one was being treated for high blood pressure with two medications, both of which lowered your blood pressure, but your doctor never measured the blood pressure, you might be a little concerned because obviously you can have overcorrection of the blood pressure, undercorrection. So, it's just untenable. We'd never do that. But in brain pacing, we've had a system whereby neither the medication nor the DBS is monitoring this beta band, this beta rhythm. So when they both kick in, or the DBS is on all the time, but when the medication kicks in, then this beta power may be dropped too far and may lead to adverse effects such as dyskinesias, perhaps other things. And also when the medication wears off, beta band power will come back up again. And depending on where your DBS is set, it may then result in, reoccurrence of your symptoms. So with adaptive DBS, and this is where ADAPT PD, this first trial, comes into effect, is the first thing it's asking the adaptive DBS system to do is to monitor that beta band power while people are on their regular medication therapy, with the goal that it will stabilize things. So the functional outcome that the FDA wanted was to show an equivalence to open loop, our current DBS, in terms of on time without dyskinesias. So wanted to make sure that using adaptive DBS plus medication is not going to make the person worse, and ideally, hopefully make it better. And so it's very interesting. So we have two modes, and the reason why it's a randomized crossover trial is that there are two ways you can do this. You can do this with what we call dual threshold algorithms, which is the method that we introduced, which is what we call the thermostat mechanism. So you have an upper level of beta and a lower level of beta power, and you design your algorithm so that if the beta gets too high above the upper level, then you ask the DBS to turn up the stimulation. If it's in between these two, stays the same, and if it goes below, it goes down. So it has this, modulating effect. The other one is a single threshold, where you just use a single threshold, and if it goes above it, then the system ramps between two voltage or current levels, and it ramps up. If it stays up, it just stays there, and then it ramps down. And that's the single threshold mode that was introduced by the Peter Brown's group back in Oxford a long time ago. So we're using both of these modes. So that gets into a little bit more detail, and it's kind of very interesting as we're going through the study, that it's really teaching us that adaptive DBS requires more things to think about for the patient, and the ramp up and the ramp down is actually very important. And so what we're working on now is what I call advanced adaptive DBS strategies, which is that you can use adaptive DBS in multiple ways, just like you can use demand cardiac pacing. You can use it just to adapt in a kind of slow fashion to your medication, induced drops in beta, or you can use it in terms of the work we're doing in freezing of gait, or these stochastic measures that come up that need fairly rapid adjustments. Same with tremor. So it's going to be a very interesting field where this is going to spur all kinds of new technology, and already is, where you can use different frequencies, you can use different parts of the lead, you'll be using different targets in the brain, but you suddenly have this bigger space to deal with. And this is more like biological in the sense that you're now using the brain's own rhythm to drive this therapy, which we believe is going to be better for the person and better over the long term, and hopefully lead to less tolerance. Over a lot of people with DBS say, I do fine for a year and then I seem to not be doing so well. And is it the progression of the disease? Is there some sort of tolerance? Because the brain is probably not terribly happy with being bombarded 24/7 with high frequency stimulation. And the brain is very good at just dialing down what it doesn't want to look at or hear. But we're already seeing some really interesting effects of adaptive DBS that might make it more useful than open loop for actual superiority in function. So I think it's more efficient. It can adapt to other therapies. That's going to be its entry point. And then for us, very interesting whether the sequence effect, progressive bradykinesia, progressive loss of speech volume, progressive loss of stride length that leads to freezing. We're seeing, and we've published a couple of papers showing just the beginnings of an insight that this might have an edge over open loop DBS, and medication doesn't improve that. So we're very excited that there may be something else that we can help people with as far as what's been missed so far with our current therapies. So that's kind of a big overview.
Yeah, so a couple of questions. You mentioned a little bit about it, but so when you're using adaptive DBS, it's going to different targets, or maybe not?
No, it's going to be your lead. Your lead is going to be put in the target exactly where you want it to be, right? GPI, STN, thalamus, and you may use a directional or a concentric lead. What you need is something called a sensing system. So at the moment, Medtronic's the only one out with a sensing system. And as you know, they just put out their directional leads. Now we can sense from all of these 8 leads. So that's kind of the only difference in the hardware. The interesting thing will be is how you use this as far as where you sense, where you stimulate, and what parameters you use. So it's really more in the DBS programming phase. You correct selection of patient, correct lead location, and then this is basically more sophisticated programming.
Okay, yeah, so that was my next question. What are you finding in terms of the programming, like significantly more challenging, or people that have received it, you're able to dial it in faster because it's sensing? I'm just so curious, because that seems to be the big point for people, that is the programming part.
Yeah, I don't think we know that yet. Obviously, in the studies we've done, we do an awful lot of kind of calibration and setting things up, but we're just kind of the first users trying to navigate the
the program. What we believe and what's going to come pretty soon is that there's going to be an automated algorithm, at least to help you know where to stimulate in the brain. So the thing that's not quite out yet with the SureTunes or system of Medtronics is that they're going to update the physician tablet, and you can import all the imaging of the patient's own imaging, and you'll get a much better look as to where that lead is. And I've been looking forward to this for a very long time, because I feel like it gives the neurologists back the control. We always make pictures of where we think the lead is, what the angle is, and we send it to the programmer. But we're probably the only people, apart from Jerry Vitek's group, that, you know, is where I learned it from, who do this, because it's quite difficult if you're a neurologist who's not attached to the surgical group. You have no idea where this lead is. And that to me is a huge shame, because somebody could spend hours trying to get the programming correct, but in actual fact, the lead's not in the STN, which is unfortunately more common than you'd like to think. So with directional leads, there's clearly been a documented reduction in lead revisions. So you can salvage some of that not optimally placed lead locations by directing the field, but not, you know, if you're far enough away, nothing's going to help. So a neurologist now, when they pick up the programmer, they see the patient for the first time at initial programming, they're going to be able to see where this lead is. And if it's way off, they're going to be able to say, look, I'm not going to waste the patient's or my time programming this. I'm going to get hold of the neurosurgeon and say, I think we should probably relook at this and maybe think about a revision, that kind of thing. So I think it's going to make it, make it a lot more tailored for the neurologist. So say that's not the case, the lead's in an okay location, then these algorithms are going to sort out, partly by sensing beta, various different things, where the best site is in the STN. It's going to tell you where you should be thinking of programming. And then still, if they're using open loop DBS, it makes the empirical part of programming a lot easier. Now, if you're going to use adaptive DBS, you already have just a little quick button you press on the Medtronic tablet, and it gives you the beta profile on all of the leads, and you can choose the one that has the higher beta profile. And once you move to adaptive DBS, we'll have by that time got good enough to have kind of algorithms that will tell people how to set everything up. So I think that's the point of this study. And then the patient will have the option, you know, to use the ADBS or use CDBS, and they can just use different groups. And I think that's going to be how it rolls out. So this study is the international pivotal study to achieve FDA approval. And that once that happens, then, you know, anyone can use it. That's kind of one of my reasons to move quickly with some of the other research directions I think we need to go in. It's already approved in Japan. For some reason, they just kind of bypassed that study stage. And so it's approved in Japan, and we're planning on working with them to look at some of this data with Medtronic to see if we can get some initial ideas of how it's working in that country. So it's coming quite quickly. That's why I'm sort of, you know, kind of nervously trying to get everybody up to speed in the study, because I think it's going to be, we really need to develop the educational toolboxes for people who are not necessarily attached to the research sites.
Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned that obviously some symptoms you're going to progress. Your Parkinson's is going to progress over time, and the hope is that this is going to adapt to those progressions. I guess the question is what kind of a system is it in terms of battery powered, how long it lasts, like what people are expecting for changing, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So the initial device, Percept, that we're using right now is a primary cell, so it will have to be replaced. But by the time it needs to be replaced, they are planning to have a rechargeable system. So I think the priorities for Medtronic were get the Percept system out, which was the FDA approval of all the work that we've done with Activa PC plus S, then get SureTunes out, the directional lead, plus the updates, the firmware updates, and then they're going to be moving to upgrading the Percept to a rechargeable system. So for those of us who are working in research, we use the Summit RC plus S, and that's a rechargeable device. Medtronic has made the decision not to move forward with that particular device, but to move forward with Percept and kind of bring in some of the attributes of the Summit system the rechargeability of it, and kind of take it in that direction. So
Okay.
that, I think that'll be so. And of course, as you know, Boston has now kind of gone back and offer a primary cell instead of only offering a rechargeable system. So I think all the companies are, figuring out what's best for the patient, what do people like, and they'll all have the same thing, except sensing. Medtronic seems to be the only one. I'm not sure what Boston, I probably will find out soon, but Boston is not pushing on that right now. I think they're waiting to see, if it's really worth the investment, and we'll see.
Yeah, so you talked about like if a medication is kicking in, the DBS can go down. So in your experience, what percentage of people that get DBS are still taking a decent amount of meds?
Yeah, that is such an interesting thing. In my practice, not a lot, as you know from certain person we know very well, because they really don't want to take medication. It's one of the primary reasons they're doing DBS, is they want to come down on meds. Most people are not completely off. And for those who are completely off, at some point they go back on a bit of medication. But I've had people for 15 years off medication. Other centers, other neurologists actually approach this therapy very differently. And I find it interesting in that they don't necessarily decrease people's medication. In my opinion, you use DBS, as much as you can as the kind of overall bath to get that therapy up, and then you use medication on top. It's very interesting to me to see a lot of neurologists use medication, and sort of, I don't know what they're topping DBS up with, but it's very interesting. So there are a lot of people who find that, people with Parkinson's, who find that they have dyskinesias because they're on dual therapy and they cycle. And as soon as my patients start medication again, they start to cycle. It's like doesn't matter how much they're taking. It's interesting. It seems to kick off that reaction in the brain. Whereas on DBS, of course, they're not cycling because it's not the way the therapy works. They may look very akinetic, very still, as you know, but they can move okay. But it's interesting, that sort of akinesia is definitely a feature of medication. It improves it, whereas DBS, you can still move quickly, but when you sit still, everybody thinks you're very off. And in fact, the person with Parkinson's doesn't feel as bad as the neurologist. So sometimes I feel that the neurologist is so uncomfortable seeing somebody who looks slightly akinetic that they kind of give them medication. So it's a very interesting aspect of our field and our field. I think many neurologists, they're probably on quite a lot of medication, in which case this might really be helpful. Having said that, it may be that what happens is, because they're on so much medication, that system just goes down to zero half the time. But then what it'll do is it'll come up as that medication wears off. So it's going to be stabilizing the meds. It's just going to be very interesting over time to see how it's used.
Right. So one question, so I know that a lot of seems like the biggest complaint that I hear around DBS is the voice.
Yes.
That change. Is two questions. Is it possible for the people who get DBS and then are also very medicated that their voice is not as impacted because the medication can help that piece? Or is this a situation where with adaptive DBS, if it is going down, that your voice might get better? Or is that that's just an across the board thing? When you get DBS, that happens.
So that is one of the windows of hope I have about adaptive DBS. So there was a paper written in 2015 by Simon Little and Peter Brown suggesting that adaptive DBS did not cause speech difficulties, whereas CDBS did. That was a very small group of patients. ADBS was done for a very short period of time. However, we have enough data in our calibration work and the work we're doing right now that is actually making us write this grant we're submitting to the NIH, where we are seeing that adaptive DBS might be superior to CDBS and definitely medication in what we call the sequence effect, which is the progressive loss of volume of speech, the progressive. So to me, I think it's going to really depend on what aspects of speech we're talking about. And I am really excited to think that there may be an aspect of speech that is not going to be detrimentally affected with adaptive DBS. Medication, maybe for some people it helps their speech, but as you know, as time goes on, that also seems to be a non-dopaminergic feature. And I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how adaptive DBS does. As speech is sort of non-dopaminergic in general, I think we're going to be hard-pressed to really find any therapy that really improves speech back to normal as the disease progresses, because it's rather like cognition. Will need another target, we'll need another place for for speech in itself, but maybe we can make things better by not making it worse.
Okay. What are there any questions I should have asked that I didn't ask about this?
I think the take-home message with adaptive DBS is that it's going to be available if this study is successful. It is already available in Japan. We still need to do a lot of research on it, meaning that we know, as I said, the entry points are that it will stabilize dual therapy. I think that it will be an option and it will be useful for some people. There are other things that we still need to look at. It's definitely more efficient than open loop DBS, meaning you use less energy. So that's going to be very helpful. And then, don't expect it to be the cure-all, which is, I think, one of these fallacies that every time we have a slightly new therapy, we still have a lead in the dopaminergic sensory motor networks, and hopefully this will be better with fewer side effects, but it's not going to fix cognition. It's not going to completely fix speech and things like that, that are already outside that network. So, it's still a local DBS therapy. It's just a different way of programming. But yes, I do believe it's a huge advance because of that cardiac pacemaker analogy. And look what happened to cardiac pacing. It just completely revolutionized the therapy. So I'm very excited that this will just lead to more and more types of therapies, technologies, new targets, etc., that will have a greater therapeutic to risk benefit ratio.
Great. So I know people are going to ask me, what is your best guess that when something like this would be available based on, all the research that you're doing, and what do you think?
Well, Medtronic would like to finish the recruitment phase within the year. We're slightly ahead of our recruitment right now. And so then the study, give it a year or two after that, perhaps. So not too long, like 3 years, perhaps.
Yeah, great.
Don't hold me to that.
I won't. I won't. This is great. This is super informative. I love it. So great.
Yeah, it's exciting. I am really excited about it.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for taking the time.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.